his computer. Okay, hi everybody. I'm Eric Hertenberger, and this is SIG Testing, our weekly meeting. It is Tuesday, December 12th. Thank you all for joining. This meeting is being publicly recorded and will be posted to YouTube shortly. Today on our agenda, we're going to have a little demo and talk about kubespawn. We're going to talk a little bit about the organizational structure of this SIG and how we might want to change it going forward. And if there's any interest, I can recap the slides I presented at KubeCon that I think pretty much everybody here was there. So with that, Chris, I will hand off to you to talk about kubespawn.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, my name is Chris. I'm from a small company in Berlin called Kinfolk. You may know us from our work on Rocket. Yeah, so we, in the course of doing our work on Kubernetes, we created a tool that is similar in scope to Minikube, where you have a local Kubernetes cluster. However, it does things quite differently. It's also, one of the main features is it's a multi-node cluster that you get. So I gave a lightning talk at KubeCon about testing patches for Kubernetes, and so we have a defined workflow for that. You basically tag the hypercube image. After you build, you pass that to kubespawn, and it'll boot into that Kubernetes clusters. And one of the cool things, you can have multi-node clusters, so you can give them names, just like you would give a Git branch a name. And so you can test side by side the cluster with the fix and without the fix. Now, we do not use VMs to do this, and we do not use app containers to do this. So this is quite different from Minikube, which uses a VM, or is just on the host if you choose that flag. And it's quite different from the Docker and Docker solutions, which use a app container. So what we use is OS containers, and these are based on systemd nspawn. So you can basically set up a 3 to 5 node cluster for about the same resource usage as you can with Minikube. Last week, right before KubeCon, we went through all the certification stuff. So we are actually a certified Kubernetes distro. But the cool thing is, you can not only test your apps on it, you can actually test the changes on Kubernetes. So we talked to quite a few people at KubeCon, and we were basically told we should talk to the SIG testing because there's, I think you all are looking for a solution to easily test Kubernetes changes. And so one of the cool things we think kubespawn can be used for is to have a highly dense, you can use it, like I said, you can do multi-node clusters. And so you can have a very dense test environment on a Kubernetes certified, Kubernetes cluster. So on I've had up to 11 node clusters running, and it works just fine. It's quite nice. So I don't know if that's, we were told to come here, so, and we, for our own test purposes, for example, the Rocketlit, which we released about 2 weeks ago, the first version of Rocketlit, the CRI implementation for Rocket, we tested with that pretty much exclusively. Out of the box, it just uses the normal Docker stuff, but we do actually have support for running with different CRI implementations. And I think Antonio, who works on CRI-O, he's working on, right now we run with a CoreOS container Linux image. He's working on getting Fedora support in there so that we can run CRI-O as well. So.
This is really cool, and actually I'm really glad Ben joined, because we've had discussions multiple times about finding a way to run end-to-end tests, but on a much lower fidelity cluster. As some people are trying to shove that into the box of integration tests, but basically like much lower resource usage, running all the Kubernetes components on a single node. And we've taken a couple stabs at this. I don't actually know enough about the fidelity of the other stabs we've taken to understand how what you're talking about differs. But the fact that it's been certified as conformant sounds really cool to me. I think Maru and Ben probably know more about this than I do, if you guys want to comment on it at all.
I missed the whole beginning of the meeting. It's been super hectic. Sorry.
It's all good, but I mean, the TLDR from what I heard is you can basically run a certified conformant Kubernetes cluster on a single node using not app containers, but something pretty similar to that, and it's been sufficient.
OS containers, yeah.
Pardon?
OS containers. So you use the whole operating system, it just shares a kernel. So this technology is of course systemd and spawn. What we use uses it, but if you look at LDX, or what's it called, LXC, yeah, they do the similar thing. So I mean, you could do the same with LXC. It's just we know systemd because we worked on Rocket, which uses that containerization mechanism. So we chose that. So yeah.
Cool. Quick question: can we run this in a container?
Iago? Sorry, I'm here with my colleague. Iago.
That's all good. I mean,
yeah.
And we run it in a container. The reason we're asking is because we're trying to live in a brave new world where every single test that we run is itself a pod that we run on a Kubernetes cluster. And so the approach that Ben has been taking is trying to use sort of a Docker and Docker based solution to accomplish some of what you're talking about.
This is what John Bull was trying, right?
No, he was trying the other way around, running Docker containers inside a pod, inside the cluster.
Yeah, it was a bizarre nesting.
We not tried on Docker, but it might just work. Yeah, many ways to play with that.
I mean, this sounds like something cool that anyone can use, but for like our standpoint, the reason that some other people here have been working on something along the lines of like we'll run a nested Kubernetes on one machine has a large reason is that not just that we run tests as a pod, but since we can run tests as a pod, when the build or test is done, it just Kubernetes tears down all the resources. So we very much would love solutions that let us do this lower fidelity testing, but we'd really hope to be able to like toss them in a Kubernetes pod and have everything clean itself up when the pod is deleted.
I mean, I guess I have mixed feelings because I love being able to, nest things and do things cheaply. But in this case, we're talking about being able to run a Kubernetes cluster on a single VM. So as opposed to, a few VMs if we're doing
Quentin has something that sticks the whole thing in a Docker container.
Sure. I'm not saying this isn't valuable, but I'm saying I think you need both.
Right.
Because frankly, Docker has... Go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, apologies. There's one other key thing that I haven't seen in the other solutions that has been a reason that I might want to leverage Quentin, specifically for CI, which is that when it builds this tool, it takes the Bazel build and it packs all of the binaries and things you need already into the image so that when you boot this thing, it doesn't need to go like downloading any of the Kubernetes components or anything. It's all just like baked into a container you can run.
Yeah, it sounded like this was using Hypercube to effectively accomplish something similar. So I think like to give us some time to talk about the other stuff, this sounds like if you were able to really test out Rocketlit with this, that sounds like pretty impressive fidelity. And I think what I have heard is lacking, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that there isn't really an easy way to locally stand up and reproduce and debug end-to-end tests. Like the -- local provider isn't a thing or doesn't work well or something. And what you're talking about with multiple nodes on a single machine sounds really useful. And I'd love to be able to talk about this as like when a developer comes up and says, hey, how can I repro this? I can say, use your tool. That's super awesome. There's just that like it's not quite close enough thing to me where I'd love to say it's the exact same way that we run the tests in our cluster. But maybe that's just a different thing we're going to have to punt on.
We have more than one way to run things, though.
There absolutely is, for sure. And like this might meet the use case. But sorry, Ben.
I would actually say that it's a good thing to not run things exactly the same way we run them in CI because we've actually had problems where tests are overly assumptive of the environment they're in. And
right, but you need to be able to reproduce it. The point isn't that that's the only way you run it, but that if a developer needs to, they have the option of replicating the environment more or less exactly.
Right. So when I'm asking these questions, I'm not asking because I want to say, let's not push this tool. I'm asking because I want to know if I can start using this tomorrow to like reduce our load. If that's not true, it'd still be awesome to say, hey, developers, you want to run these end-to-end tests, but you don't have like a GKE cluster, use this.
Yeah. I mean, we use it for, like I said, a local development tool. We were talking to people in the, at KubeCon, and they were basically saying maybe this could be used here. You asked us if we can run it in a pod. I think that's just something we would have to try. Iago, what would you see the trouble parts there?
Yeah, I don't know. Since we do things like multi-groups inside and stuff, I assume there will be problems, but we can try. I don't think there's anything fundamental.
So for a tiny bit more background, we actually do some Docker and Docker for some test stuff today. It's not too bad on the C groups and things. The pain point has been that it still needs things like varlob Docker mounted, so we wind up not totally containerizing. We still have to mount a volume for it to store these things, but it's pretty close to the point where when a test exits, its resources are free, which is the ideal we want. So we can focus on improving the test and things and not on the resource management.
Yeah.
So I think this is really cool, and I'd love to see more discussion about this in our Slack channel to figure out how we can carry it going forward. I mean, one of the lower level things I always think of is kubetest is kind of our de facto single tool that we run to stand up a cluster, run tests against it, tear the cluster down. We have what's called a provider sort of interface where we use like a COPS provider or a Kubernetes Anywhere provider. If we can maybe figure out how to hook up like a kubespawn provider, then that can provide a lower friction path to, with one single command, immediately repro the same thing that we're doing in CI on a local environment. And yeah, any more information or blogs or something, please let's continue the discussion in Slack and carry it. Sounds cool.
Yeah, if you have particular needs that you would want us to look at, you can you can file an issue maybe that maybe points us to the what you would all need, because we don't know exactly how you test the stuff. I guess we'll do a little research, but yeah.
For sure. Well, you've got all this spare time while you're trapped in London, so. I'm so sorry.
Can someone link to this, please, in Slack or in the meeting chat?
It should be in the meeting notes. It's in the meeting chat, but I'll send it again.
Yeah, we put an ASCII Cinema demo there where you can see. That's what we had basically running at KubeSpawn at our booth. I mean, at KubeCon at our booth. So yeah, you can take a look at that.
Thank you.
Cool. Okay. Tim, you're up next with a fun topic titled Organizational Structure.
So several folks have been chatting either back channel with me or direct face-to-face with me, as well as during the KubeCon, about what exactly does SIG testing do and what was it intended to do and what are we doing currently. And there was a lot of conversations about, well, it does test infra mostly today, but that's not the way it used to be, right? So in the beginning, since Epoch, when the very beginning of SIG testing was around, there's a lot of folks who were building out the infrastructure for the tests themselves, right? The actual testing apparatus and how the tests operate. And I know because I led a team who did a lot of that initial work. So that included Rob Retai and Jay Vyas, who worked on that. So they were building out the actual tests, and some of what they did as part of the SIG was to find co-reviewers, namely Jeff or Ixty, as well as Z Merlin, who was originally around in this SIG. Then they would tackle and address items as part of the release process, right? So that way it was constantly moving forwards. The tests themselves got better over time, and people were constantly iterating on those pieces. Now, some of those restructurings still occur, but they don't get a clearinghouse. And what's going to happen in the next 2 releases or so is there are going to be a lot of changes to the testing structure. And as a point of order, I wanted to start to feel out the idea of either, there's multiple ways to handle this. One is to resig things, and people are pretty adamant against that idea. The other idea is to either have a sub-project who focuses directly on the tests themselves, as well as, unit integration, performance, and end-to-end. or to have it as a separate working group. And I wanted to talk about it here to get feedback about what people think. The reason being is the first 20 minutes of a 30-minute conversation were devoted towards a tool, which is around testing, which isn't bad. There's nothing wrong with that. But if we're going to get a focus group of a large body of people involved, I want to make sure we're judicious about the use of time and making sure that we allot a good slot of that to people who are going to be executing against deliverables within a given milestone. So with that, a little bit of history as well as thought, feel free to chime in on your thoughts there.
I have many opinions, but I really do want to hear other people's thoughts before I say anything.
I was one of the people that was talking to Tim, and I do think that there is insufficient focus on testing sort of at the project level, like individual SIGs focus on their little piece of the pie. But especially as, breaking out federation and starting to think about how sub-projects are going to be testing, that kind of prompted me to think that we don't really have a great deal of common testing infrastructure that is sort of consumable outside of KK. And so I'm hoping, whether or not we have a separate venue for working on it, it just seems like there's so much to do on the infra side that we don't really have a lot of bandwidth left over for focusing on enabling people to improve the testing and the amount and the quality. So that's kind of my motivation for supporting some change, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think as we are breaking stuff out downstream as well, we're noticing that same thing. And I think it's also happening in a lot of the incubator projects. I'm not sure exactly how much bandwidth people in this current conversation have today, but I think we should be able to recruit people from all the various incubators. Right now, I know a couple of them have just complete forks of the DDE framework that they're using, because otherwise the dependencies weren't going to work out. And maybe that was necessary for the velocity that they were targeting at the beginning, but at some point that needs to come back together. Otherwise it's going to start becoming pretty fragmented. So I think there's definitely going to be a huge push for that.
I'm not sure what I'm hearing here is that this is a problem because SIG testing does infra things, or if it's a problem because we need more people to actually work on these things.
I think there needs to be leadership for some of these items. And SIG testing might be the one where that comes from, I don't know.
Yeah, there also needs to be a clearinghouse. So either we allot the time, as A, B, or C, because we only have half an hour. And a lot of the time that, today is the good example where 20 minutes was consumed talking about testing, which isn't bad, again. It's just that there's going to need to be a clearinghouse for this stuff in the next cycle, because there will be a lot of people spinning into it. So just as a background, the CNCF is going to potentially, this hasn't been officially blessed yet, potentially hire a consulting firm to go through and determine API coverage and the granularity for how to start to add all of these new tests into the mix. And that's currently our API coverage in the conformance suite is less than 30%. So if you think about that as a whole and the current number of tests we have, that's going to be a lot of churn. And we would just be focused and execute on some of those pieces, as well as being mindful of the broader scope problems that exist in the testing apparatus. I myself have not forked, but I've done the same thing as OpenShift has done, and basically have an extended test suite external to the main repository that I use as part of Heptio stuff.
I would say that I would hope that it would remain at least fairly closely tied to SIG testing, even if SIG testing were to become like SIG Infra or something. Not dependent on them or anything, but in close discussion with. And I would hope that we can bring some of the the SIGs for these different Kubernetes areas in on owning and improving these tests as well. Right? I don't know if we just have people solely working on tests that that totally solves everything.
So there's a couple options that I vetted. One is the heavyweight option is the nuclear one, right? The second option is the sub-project one, which is common to run across SIG cluster lifecycle. The third one is the working group one, which is it's the same thing as a sub-project, it's just named differently.
Brian Grant's email suggested that a sub-project is kind of just within the SIG, whereas a working group is potentially multi-SIG. Is that not the case?
Sub-project is still owned by the SIG, but they usually have separate meetings. That's what cluster lifecycle does across many things. Working group is a cross-functional, many SIGs together thing. But Aaron's got his hand raised, so I'll stop talking.
I don't know. I think I'm in violent agreement. So like, I was also, I helped found the SIG in the first place. And so I remember like helping Jay go through some of those reviews and XD helping out with some of the reviews. And to Ben's point, it does seem like nobody owns the testing framework stuff anymore. And so like, I repeatedly said at KubeCon, like, and I've said over time, like SIG testing, we are here, we will defend to the death your right to run tests, but we will not write them for you. And I don't know if that's too off-putting or whatever, but I made a plea where like, look, I can tell that it is a bad thing that when people come up and ask me, hey, I want to contribute, I want to write an end-to-end test, can you point me at a good example of a good end-to-end test? Actually, no, I can't. I don't have the time and I don't have the bandwidth. But I really think that SIG testing is the right place to talk about this sort of thing. And I want to figure out how to incentivize those people and empower them to show up and drive this stuff forward. And it sounds like, Tim, you are that person, and I'm super cool with that. So I think I do like the sort of meta or umbrella SIG model where we use this weekly meeting as some kind of collaboration area, information radiation area, whatever you want to call it, where I think we have a couple different efforts underway. Testing is one of them. Testing for improvements is another. Like making the test infra stack reusable across projects, as well as how are we actually improving the experience of this project. I personally, my dog in this fight is I think that contributor experience and SIG testing both have overlap in the same area of how do we improve the process of contributing to this project and how do we more easily automate that. They literally touch the same code. And in this great new world where we're supposed to be assigning a charter, I somehow feel like that's all gooped in there. And further, I think like how do we repeatably build Kubernetes, right? There's this discussion of Bazel happening in a channel that's like SIG testing. And like SIG testing seems to own most of the Bazel jobs, but really Bazel is also about a repeatable build. So I see a number of different sub areas that fall under the umbrella of what we collectively care about and have been doing. I don't know if testing is the right word for it, but in the short term, I kind of want to say SIG testing is like the umbrella thing. We figure out if we need a different cadence or different meeting length to be able to sync up on these things. We talk about whether we want to do TikTok models to focus on areas as needed to really drive stuff forward. But like I sat in the SIG Apps deep dive session where SIG Apps is also run as kind of like a meta SIG, and they were wondering whether or not there are too many things going on there under the umbrella of that SIG, right? You hear the app dev working group, there's compose, there's helm, there's charts, there's brigade, there's draft, there's all sorts of stuff. And the overwhelming response from people was, no, we like hearing all about this in one place. We like that this is kind of a big meeting where you hear all about the things in this one specific area. And so here, this specific area seems to be like, I don't know, reliably building and testing Kubernetes, whether that's the infrastructure to do it, whether that's the process of how we consume and use those results, or whether that's the actual tests themselves.
I'd just like to point out that it might be nice for somebody who's not actually working on stuff, who's just kind of wants an information dump on them, that, yeah, put it all in one big pile and I'll filter through. But if you're actually working on it, or you're trying to just collaborate with like a certain group of people, it's a subset, and having everything just conjoined isn't always the best idea. So I don't know that SIG Apps is the best example here.
I agree, but I think cluster lifecycle, so SIG Apps is kind of like things are focused on individual code bases for the most part, where we kind of have conjoined code bases, and maybe we can talk about breaking that up a little bit. Like I think a reusable framework doesn't necessarily have to live in a repo called test infra. I don't think it should be living in KK either, right? It should be its own project that's consumable by whatever repo needs that reusable testing framework. And so to the other point, like I feel like I've seen Steve and OpenShift contribute heavily to the direction of Prow moving forward. And something I haven't had the bandwidth to do is to actually do a good job of sorting through the pile of all the Prow related things and like how we're changing and updating Prow and communicating it to the rest of the project. And I've been in talks with Tim and Eric about maybe bringing Steve on board to help out with that in a lead capacity, just to like formalize the fact that there's been a lot of legwork put in to push the project forward. And like, the name doesn't mean much to me, but I think if other people care about the term SIG lead, I'm certainly a +1 for it. And we don't really we don't have a whole charter. We don't have a mandate. I mean, y'all tell me if you want to kick me out of a leadership position because we don't have any sort of charter or governance thing in place. And I don't feel a strong need to formalize that unless we have to. But it seems like if I want to be able to put stuff on Steve's plate to help organize the flow of information and do a better job of giving the community a heads up for the sorts of stuff we're doing that might impact them, it seems like mutually beneficial. I want that to be like an example of how we kind of grow and improve upon the SIG's charter.
So a part of the difference between this SIG, and I think it kind of is broken down over time, has been that there's deliverables and known actionable things that are people agree upon and people buy into as these are the P0 items for this release cycle. Here's the P1 items for this release cycle that actually affect, outside of the scope of test infra itself. That is known because Google funds a lot of that. Some other folks are funded too. But the actual tests themselves, people have not bought into execution model style things that we have traditionally done in the past. Like we used to literally source Jay as the person who would fix the configuration apparatus for the tests for, PX cycle or whatever. He would literally, be the person who would be funded to work on other pieces of the puzzle. Right?
And that to me is back to Ben's point of like, I totally want these people and I want to help them to accomplish that work. If it's a question of letting them know that this is a safe place to be empowered to do that, totally happy to do that. But I can't provide the funding myself right now, right?
Well, the question is then apparatus for how we execute, right? Like if folks want to talk about test infra, I don't care. I mean, that's their thing. That's good for them. But I don't want to be a part of it, really. That's not what I care about. But I understand that some of the people in test infra have an overlap, right? So yes. It is a Venn diagram where I care a lot about what's going to be in the conformance, performance, integration unit test suite and the refactorings that occur. But I don't necessarily care about this other stuff.
What I personally would want to see is a proposal for how you would want to structure things. I think that a separate meeting where you have that clearinghouse that operates at whatever cadence is necessary makes sense, with the implied idea that you float the proposal for how that works through this SIG and that we get some kind of report back into this SIG at some kind of regular cadence, be it every other week. I'm totally fine changing this SIG up so we have 1 week that's super infra heavy, 1 week that's super test heavy, kind of whatever makes sense. It's not necessarily my intent to hash that out in this high bandwidth environment. I think I see a lot of head nodding and an agreement to the general idea. I think what comes next is do the proposal, let's do it in a written documented form through the mailing list, +1 or whatever we feel like we need to do to drive it forward.
Sure. I can just write up a quick draft email. It's not going to be super long or verbose, but it'll try to be focused. Right.
I mean, does that sound good to everybody else?
Yes. I just want to add, I have to run, and it's not actually within my employment to work on the test directly, but I'm very interested in seeing that happen. I'd like to help. So a separate meeting that people can choose to attend or not sounds like a pretty fair option to me.
I think we've had pretty good success with breakout sessions and reporting back. I don't see why this would look much.
I think we've done not the best job at actually recording those breakout sessions and sharing.
Recording, no. Some meeting notes have been taken.
I want to get better at us using the same SIG infrastructure to do you come to SIG testing and hear all the sub-projects that are happening under us. In the same playlist, you can see all the information you want for each of the sub-projects that are talking about testing or conformance.
Would be good to have like a shared, whether, I mean, I'm not sure how other SIGs are doing it, but like Zoom or something, because right now we also have the weird split between Hangouts and Zoom.
We do have a shared Zoom. It seems to be difficult to get Googlers to use it for some strange reason, which I'm happy to remind them of what the username and password is for said Zoom account. But yeah, I think, and I like either idea. I'd say like let's ask more people what their preference is for whether it's this time or whether it's yet another meeting. Because I'm happy to do any option. Because there are times when it seems like we're just talking just to talk to fill this space, and maybe we should be talking about testing related stuff. I think.
Yeah, I'll float a proposal and I'll write it down. I'll use SIG cluster lifecycle as an example. But usually I'm a very details-oriented execution style person. So I literally have backlogs and prio-sorted lists for everything. So that's just how I roll. So that will be how the modus operandi I would kind of fall under. So.
Okay.
Right. So I will draft something up and get it out probably either today or tomorrow.
All right. Sounds good. And we're 6 minutes over this incredibly short meeting. Yeah, I think that's it, unless anybody has anything else. All right. Happy Tuesday, all.